So today we have with us Stephen Wisner. Stephen is the owner and operator of Eau Claire Anglers. He's been a staple in the fly fishing and fishing community in Western Wisconsin and beyond for a lot of years, a lot longer than I've been here for sure. So Stephen, thanks very much for being with us today.
Yeah, hey, awesome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great. So this is our 2 tips, a tie and a tune. So we get a chance to pick the brains of some people who fish around here, and probably nobody puts as much time on the water as you do, or knows the water as well as you do here. So let's just jump right in and talk a little bit about a couple tips that you have for people who might fish around here.
Yeah, and mine are, I realize this is, through the 2 chapter, but I'm going to do a couple that have to do with river fishing, probably more for warm water.
Good.
Kind of species. And the first one is, so I'm going to do a gear tip and then maybe a technique tip or something to be thinking about. The first gear tip I have, and this is really, I think, revolutionized my fishing, at least down here on the lower Chippewa River, where, anytime you're fishing for smallmouth bass in water where there are a lot of pike, where you have a lot of pike, you're going to run into a real problem, which are, pike have sharp teeth, and you're going to lose flies. And it's a bummer. I mean, it's one thing if there are a bunch of little hammer handles and you're just mad because you're losing flies, but it's another thing really when the potential for a 40+ inch pike is there, and they like smallmouth flies. And this won't work for all flies, but if you're fishing some kind of a minnow pattern, and when we get to the tie part today, I've got a minnow pattern for you. But if you're fishing some kind of a minnow pattern, which on the lower Chippewa here that's probably what you're going to be fishing a lot. It's not necessarily loaded with crayfish, let's say, like other pieces of water are. So you end up fishing a lot of bait fish patterns. And if you do that, what I started to realize was when I was getting bit off by pike, you get bit off usually in the first inch. Like usually it's right at the eye of the hook. And if you tie your fly on like with a loop knot, you'd get back a little right, because it would be getting bit right there. And it makes sense. The pike come and they just turn right on the head. They want to take the minnow head first. And so you'll see that eat where they just come right around on it, and then they rake their teeth across your line, and it gets cut. And so it turns out there's this stuff, and it's made by American Fishing Wire that I found. And it's 7x7 wire, 13 pounds. So it's really really light, kind of lightweight stuff. It's not going to affect the way your fly works. And it's really, if you buy the 7x7, it's really, really limber. In fact, it's more limp than mono. So if you don't have to worry about having a big hunk of heavy, stiff wire attached. And so basically what I do is I just double surgeon's knot this to the end of my leader. And remember, when you're fishing smallmouth with minnow patterns, you don't need a leader any more than 5 feet long. Really 3 feet probably would do it. And just do a short little piece of this, about that much. And then I usually just put a snap on the end, just a lightweight snap. I just buy the number 1 snaps. And that way you don't have to, every time you change flies, you're not having to cut back on the wire.
Right.
And then, so that just, you have this little piece of wire, and you can't believe the difference in how many pike you'll put in the boat.
So it's tieable. It's tieable,
oh, it's
flexible.
Totally tiable. It ties, and you just use a double surgeon's knot, same as you would a piece of tippet. And, it ties just exactly the same as, and then you can just tie your snap on with a clinch knot, would be fine. The snap's going to give you that action that you'd get like from a loop knot. Right. So you don't really need to do a loop knot to your snap.
Okay.
And then you can change flies really easily, and you can, several pike into this 13-pound stuff, it'll start looking a little rough, so you might want to change it out. And, I love this stuff. And the only downside of it is, I think, what do I have here? 16 feet of it, and it's about $20. So it's not cheap. Yeah. But you're only going to be using like 6 inches of it at a time. Right. So you can get a lot a lot of liters of it. So that's like my first tip. And really, I can't tell you many things that have revolutionized fishing down here for me the way that has, because now I'm not afraid of pike.
Really
Like,
interesting.
so we go into spots like it used to be like if you got some really shallow little back area, especially in June, and it's like, don't even throw your fly back there because we're just going to lose it. It's a bummer. And now it's like, by all means, let's do it.
Interesting. Well, and like you said too, the cost. I mean, it's one thing, like you said, the cost of losing a fish, but you're losing a fly. You tie on a decent fly that put some time and materials in, and if this, that's so. So what is AFW? Is that what?
American Fishing Wire is the brand. They call it Surflon Micro Supreme 7x7. And you got to make sure don't get the 7x1, because with the whole thing that makes it so limp is having all those little micro strands.
So what is that 7x7? Is that some kind of measurement of how many
strands there are? So there's 7 strands that are wrapped by 7. Each strand is getting wrapped by 7 strands. So you've got 48 strands in there, and it's a whole lot of a lot of wire, but that's what keeps it so limp.
Interesting. That's a great point.
I use the same brand and the same stuff for my musky leaders. I just use the 30-pound instead.
Okay.
And there same deal. I just double surgeon's knot that to 40-pound maxima. And with musky leaders, I'm fishing maximum of a 3-foot leader. So you're not. Okay. I mean, that's the simplest thing in the world.
Yep.
Anyways, that's tip number 1.
That's great. That's awesome.
Tip number 2 is really just has to do with fishing out of a boat. The number one thing that I see that I think costs people fish when they fish out of a boat is not having their fly come off. Usually we're fishing a bank, a lot of the time around here, just because it gives you something to shoot at. But the same thing holds true if you're throwing at midstream rocks. That people tend to, the thing that you want to have happen is you want your fly to come off the bank exactly, really perpendicular to the current line. What happens, where people struggle is when they throw their fly in, the same way as it would happen if you were fishing dry flies. The current's usually a little slower next to the bank than it is towards the boat. And if you throw kind of a cast that's got some slack in it, you're going to get a big belly in the line, usually downstream. And so then your streamer patterns, if we're talking about, these kinds of minnow patterns, instead of coming out perpendicular to the current, they're going to run downstream, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Well, predator fish are not used to that. Things don't run into their mouth. It's just like if dogs like to chase you when you're on your bicycle, but they don't like it if you turn around and ride right at them. It freaks them out. I mean, same kind of thing. And
Sure.
So what they're used to, the fastest way to flee a predator fish is to go straight, hit the current line perpendicularly when you're trying to run away, And so that's what they're used to having bait fish do. And when they don't behave that way, they don't recognize them as food.
Interesting.
And when I have clients that are where their flies are running like that, they don't tend to get very many fish to eat.
Really?
And so the way to achieve that is pretty simple. The number one thing is to fish angle at 45 degrees downstream when you're casting.
Sure.
Because then even if a little bit of a belly forms, it's actually almost beneficial. It's going to bring that fly straight out sideways.
Yeah.
Where if you're casting back upstream, if you start turning and are facing the stern of the boat, it's really hard.
Yeah.
All right. And I'll tell you what, everybody, as the day goes on, starts turning back because you start wanting to hit that thing, didn't quite get the right cast in on it. So you try it again and you try it again, and next thing you know, you're facing backwards and nothing works right. And that's where, so that's a thing to be really aware of. And sometimes it requires you to mend. Like I do a lot of little mends when I throw my flies in just to get them to come off the way
So you might do an upstream mend in order to
upstream mend just to make sure, or even just do a little reach cast when I go in. But usually what mostly will make it happen is if you face 45 degrees and if you make your cast go in without a lot of belly in the line. So you're throwing kind of tighter loops and getting them in. And if you can get right on the stripping, so if you're not getting your line wrapped around your reel, wrapped around, which happens all the time. I mean, it's, and it's a long day with a lot of casts. So
that's a great
there's a few times, sometimes you have no choice but to cast back upstream into something. Like if there's a sweeper log, and you got to get the boat around it, and the only way to get a fly in there is to go back up at it. Those are special circumstances. But then you got to remember, after it didn't, then turn around and start fishing right again.
Right.
Well,
that's a great point.
Those are the two. Yeah, those are the two real tips I have. I mean, they're both. The second one, it applies to. It's the exact same with trout. If you go out, if you're on a float trip out west, and you're fishing streamers, or down in Arkansas, where you're really going to be fishing a lot of streamers for trout. It's the same game. I'm sure your guide's going to tell you the exact same thing when you're there, or if you haul a drift boat out to the Bighorn or something, you're going to end up with the same situation. And it really is the difference between catching fish and not catching fish.
Interesting. What about, so, you want it to be perpendicular to the current. Is there any, do you ever tell clients, or is there, if you're going to air, do you actually air on, do the bait fish tend to go upstream? Like, are you better to air upstream?
I'd probably rather have it angle a little bit upstream.
That downstream is pretty unnatural.
Than having it run. And, and then there's also interesting stuff. I mean, so if you got a mend in there and everything's right, you can also, so a smallmouth, I'll keep going. Smallmouth bass are different than muskies and really different than trout in that, man, there's nothing they love more than a fly that's not moving at all. It's just dead drifting in the current. It's like you can give a little streamer pattern like this, a twitch, and then just let it ride. But if you have that big belly in your line, it won't work that way. It's going to get ripped the same way a dry fly will. You can't get it drag-free float. So having that little mend or keeping the line out that way allows you to just let that fly. It can just sit. And a lot. You'd be amazed how often people are reaching for a drink of water or something like that, and then all of a sudden, they have fish, and it's because smallies love that. They love when the thing just pauses and hangs.
And that's hard, just to let it sit. So, even you cast and let it sit, you're so used to having to do something or wanting to do something.
It's really hard. Yeah. And especially with stuff like, poppers, because a popper, you'd feel like, oh, it's a popper, I got to pop it. And it's like, don't pop it. Pop it one time and then just let that thing, then fish it just like a dry fly. You'll catch way more fish generally than you will by pop, 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 Largemouth might like that or something, but smallmouth don't. They like to eat bugs, that just are drifting with the current. I think they think that's an easy, just an easy prey when it's just floating. And I think people worry, not to belabor this, but I think people worry too much about like, oh, I got to make a bunch of commotion so they'll notice it. And I'm always like, they're apex predators, man. They see that there's nothing that they're not noticing is, it's in their world. They see it and they know it's there. They're not, you don't have to worry about them being unaware. Well, watch how many times you'll drop a fly even on the bank and you'll hit them behind them, where in theory they can't even necessarily see it. And that fly hits the water and you'll see that fish just spin and destroy it. That's how hyper aware they are of what's in their world, So you don't need to move things to get them to notice it. You just don't. Any more than you do with, you can fish it's funny, we all know that we can fish a size 20, little zebra midge to a trout, and we know they're going to see it, and yet we see these bass, which arguably are better predators than trout, and we're like, oh, we got to make all this commotion or they won't know it's there. They know it's there.
That's a great point. Great point. So keeping it perpendicular, and even too, I think your point too of, thinking about from the fish perspective, like you said, it doesn't mean that you have to make a huge commotion. Doesn't mean that you have to have the biggest, gaudiest, most water pushing fly that's gonna make something happen.
Nope.
It's a great point.
No, not at all.
So
Yeah.
so then thinking about going into the tie then part of it. So talk to us about, you talked about the fly action,
Yeah.
coming in perpendicular. What about a tie? What about a fly that
Yeah.
you find interesting or meaningful?
Yeah. So this fly is going to actually fit all that stuff really well, I think. So basically what it is, and I'm going to hold this fly up. I don't know. I'm going to see if I can zoom in, whether that's going to work
Nice.
very well.
Yep.
This is a fly that I invented, or at least I took an existing pattern and just added some stuff to it. And so to set the scene, there was a fabulous fly that was tied by a guy on the east side of the state, a guide for tight lines fly fishing. And his name's Bart Landwehr, and so he called the fly the Bardo minnow. And it's a super easy to tie smallmouth bass fly. And basically, the part of this that matches the Bardo is it's got a bucktail tail. It
Mm-hmm.
has some Icelandic sheep for an overwing.
Yep.
Pardon me. It's got a little bit of this red rabbit in here that kind of makes like where it's the back of a gill plate.
Sure.
But Bart tended to think that there's something about red that makes a meat, and it does.
Yep.
I should say between the wing and the bucktail, there's a little bit of flash. I tend to be a believer in the idea that a little flash goes a long way. A lot of times, like some people just go crazy with the flash, and maybe if you're fishing muddy water, you might want it. And on a Bardo minnow, he would then take this part, the front part of the fly, and he just used a brush, EP sparkle brush,
Mm-hmm.
to make the head. And I, just in playing around, because I love the action for musky flies of a fly called the Buford that has a head that's essentially like a deer hair, ball of deer hair, like where it's
Like a spun deer hair kind of thing.
Yeah, spun deer hair head that has been trimmed, and
Mm-hmm.
it just makes that front of that fly essentially, if you're really trying to get into fly mechanics, the idea with some of these streamer patterns, people talk about pushing water, but it's really about creating high pressure and low pressure with a fly. And essentially, if you want the back end of a fly to come to life, then what you want to do is create an area of low pressure, behind the head. So the back end of the fly is in that area of low pressure and wiggling all over the place. And so essentially what I just did, instead of using the brush with this, I just took craft fur and I put it in as a wing on the top and
Mm-hmm.
another one on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I just didn't, once I tied that in, I just took the excess that was sticking off the front and just push that back, and then just essentially, reverse tie a little bit on it so it puts it back. And that was it. So it's just really simple. I mean, it's a 5-step fly, really easy. You're not going to feel terrible when it gets all beat up. You can, I like to call it a guide's fly. You can tie them like, if you need half a dozen of them for tomorrow, you can do it without it, taking forever. But the nice thing, this fly just has this really great side to side.
Oh yeah.
So on each strip, it just kicks side to side. And trout like it too. It's not, it's the same, just a basic fly. You can fish it with a floating line for smallmouth. You don't, it once it gets wet, it sinks. I mean, it's not a fast, there's no weight in it, but it sinks. If you were fishing a faster trout stream, you might want to use a sink tip when you fish this just to get it down, But for most of our streams here for smallies, you don't really need it. They look up anyway, and and it's fun because you can see them come up and eat it.
Right.
But that's basically it, And then colors, I generally, with these kind of flies, I tend to like light grays and whites.
Sure.
Partly because when we're talking about stopping and letting that thing dead drift, you'd be amazed at how often you won't feel anything. All will happen is you'll have a white fly in the current, and all of a sudden you'll just be gone. And so like, I'll be rowing and I'll just be like, set,
It's
people
gone.
won't even know. I mean, at first they're not used to it, and it's like, no, you'll just see it. It'll just disappear. Just go off the radar. It's like, oh, that's it. Hook's up.
That's great.
And so that's a fly that's pretty cool. So I call it the Steve-Eaux minnow.
Nice.
A little nod to Bart, but then I got to put the EAU for the O part.
Oh, clever. Yeah, clever.
I thought about getting really clever and putting the X on the end like that was Tony Bear.
Oh yeah. That would put you in the really cool category.
That's a little pretentious for my style, so I'm just going to keep it with EAU. So that's a Steve-Eaux minnow.
That's
and
great.
Already this year we've already gotten quite a few nice smallies on it. So I mean it's a great lower Chippewa, lower Wisconsin, anywhere where you're fishing a lot of sort of minnow patterns.
Right.
It's gonna work. Yeah.
When you tied that up, was it a lot of iterations until you got it just right? Was it something that you kind of had it in your head?
Yeah, I think I kind of had it in my head. I mean, I just kind of looked at it and I started thinking, like, how could I get the exact same fly, but instead of the brush head, just get that material in that position. And it's like, well, now it's kind of fun because by putting it on the top and the bottom, I don't know, hopefully this camera can pick it up. By putting it on the top and the bottom, you just get this really nice minnow shape.
Yeah.
And then I should mention, then I glue on, just super glue eyes. I don't know. I know some people don't. I kind of like them. I don't know why. I tend to think sometimes maybe when the fly's just dead drifting and there's a smallie just inspecting it, maybe the addition of that eye will be enough to get him to grab. And otherwise, I don't know. I just think they look better. So
right, looks more
it
fishy.
Looks better
right?
without, and sometimes you're just doing it so that you have confidence.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's as much for the person fishing as it is for the fish that you.
I mean, we say that for sure. I mean, with all the musky guiding I do, I mean, how much of how often it really is. If you believe your fly is going to catch fish, you'll fish it seriously and you'll keep going. And that's probably what it takes. You're looking for that one player who's going to come and grab a hold, and it probably won't matter what fly you put in front of him, or if it did, you wouldn't have any idea.
Right.
What fly to use anyway. So you pick a pattern you have a lot of faith in, and then you just fish it.
Right.
And a lot of times with clients, we fish like white or brighter color, like hot pink. And part of that's because then it gives you something to look at while you're fishing, and and it keeps you in the game. If you
keeps you engaged,
where if you're fishing black, which I know we all know muskies eat, but it's hard to stay engaged when you can't see any of your stuff. And so sometimes, for us in this dark water, I just don't fish black as often. Or if I do, I put a bunch of flash on the top of it, so at least you can kind of see it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's great. And I might too, Steve, maybe afterwards, maybe you could shoot me a picture of it. I might put it up just that if the camera's blurry. And then also, we'll talk a little bit about the shop, but do you tie those and do you sell them, or is that something that you?
I don't have it. Yeah, I don't have any kind of retail sales. So I tie them for guide clients is basically it. So yeah, I don't really tie to sell. You wouldn't want to buy my flies. I don't tie pretty flies. I mean, no, when you have people like Brian or other, even Josh, who are really, really pretty fly tires. I mean, mine are meatball. I tie meatball flies and always kind of have. I mean, they work and I kind of know what they want to do, but I would feel kind of weird ever charging anybody any money for them.
That's one of the things that make you so good. You're humble, and you got the secret recipe there. So let's talk about the tunes. So I know that you're a big music guy and you listen to a wide range of things. What's the music you've been listening to now?
Well, I'll tell you, so I end up listening to, I mean, if you were going to, under normal circumstances, I mean, I listen to a lot of proto metal, old, but a real wide range, man. I can go anywhere from, I was brought up listening to Willie Nelson and kind of old school country, driving around with my dad. And I really have a soft spot for that. but I listen to a lot of this, 70s metal sounding stuff, or bands that sound like 70s metal.
Yeah.
I don't listen to that stuff with clients in the car because they probably aren't that crazy about it. But given the kind of the situation we're in, and the fact that really, like, one of my favorite performers, died of the COVID recently. And so I'm going to go with the John Prine
John
song.
Prine. Yeah.
It just feels like, nobody's ever, I wouldn't even know what to think of someone that listened to John Prine and just didn't like it. I mean, I just don't know how you couldn't. It's just so engaging. And so the song for me, obviously because we're talking fishing, is the song is John Prine. It's Fish and Whistle is the name of the song. And it's just, it's one of the catchiest John Prine songs of all time. And I don't know how you could be driving to a trout stream to go fishing and have that on, in the car and not be in a really, really good mood while you were going.
Yeah. How perfect is that?
Yeah. So that's kind of my option for this go.
Have you seen him? Have you seen him perform at all?
I haven't. My wife has seen him multiple times and is really well, the two of us was probably the earlier, kind of big time fan. But so I haven't actually, I've seen a lot of YouTube performances and I know he played here in Eau Claire at the Eau Claire Festival and I just didn't have tickets. Even though we live like almost within, I can almost see the festival grounds from here.
You could listen to it while you're fishing off your.
Yeah, right? We can totally listen to it. But Molly, my wife, went to see him, and quite honestly, I probably had a guy trip.
Right.
So I probably just missed it because of that. Yeah.
Well, and in turn, I was reading something about him too. And some of those songs that he wrote, some of them he wrote when he was 19, 20, 22, 20. It's kind of like, how'd you have that kind of insights when, most of the rest of us are just, doing stupid things and.
Yeah. And I was like, I've been so aware of John Prine since like the 80s. And to me, I just always think of being in like, sitting at the joint and having a beer here in Eau Claire. And there's like, I'm very good chance that there's a John Prine song on the jukebox at any given time.
Right.
And so I sort of was always this musician that was around. And so it really hit me hard when, when he passed away, just because, that I realized how much of my life was spent with John Prine playing in the background somewhere.
Yeah, that's a powerful. Do you listen to music in the boat at all, or do clients want to do that?
Don't. Yeah, I really don't. I like being in the world,
Yeah.
I don't sit and check my phone when we're fishing. We don't really listen to music in the boat. It just isn't really a thing. I know that that's a great big debate, and I certainly don't feel like if you want to listen to music in the boat, knock yourself out. I certainly don't have any issue with it. But for me, I don't know. It's being out and hearing the world is a big part of it for me. So yeah, I really don't. But on the drive there and the drive home for sure.
Yeah. That's what a great song. So okay, so you got our two tips. You got a great tie, the Steve-Eau, and certainly if anybody hasn't put the John Prine on, for sure. So talk to us just a little about Eau Claire Anglers. So you've been doing it. How long have you been doing?
So for Eau Claire Anglers, this is the 5th year.
Fifth year. Okay.
I should say we're going into the 6th. This is the 6th year this summer. So,
okay.
So we're just going into year number 6. I started guiding in 1984 on the Henry's Fork in Idaho. So, a lot of years ago. And I guided kind of, that style of Western guiding where you're doing, over 100 kind of days a year, in the summer, like where you guide every day in the summertime. Just go every day. And for me, it after about 6-7 years of it, that was about what I wanted to do. And I still have no desire to guide at that level. Like I don't think I would be the nearly as good of a guide if I was grinding at that kind of rate. And around here, we end up having to do maybe more driving. I mean, there's sometimes, although I do a lot of trips now, right, literally in the river right behind my house, so that makes life. So we started, and I end up guiding about. Right now, I do somewhere 50 to 60 guide trips a year. So, and that's about what I'd like to do.
Yeah.
And most of the summer it's smallmouth bass, although I do a fair number of wade trips for trout. And most of my trips are floating. I have a drift boat and floating for smallmouth bass in the summertime. And then, with muskies mixed in, but then starting in September, my focus then really totally switches to muskies. Sure. And then we fish muskies hard last year, right until the very, very end of November, so that's, and at the end of the year, it starts to be, hard. And then I have during the muskie portion of the season, there's another guy that works with me named a guy named Max Meyer, who is young, but really, I don't know of a more fishy muskie guide. It's fly fishing muskie. I mean, I don't know of anyone that had a season to match him, let's say last year, for numbers of fish, for size of fish. He really has some real chops. So because I teach school in the fall, I can really only guide on weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, and then Max takes Monday through Friday trips. Sure. And that, in some ways, has become where maybe more sort of reputation outside of the Eau Claire area, at least for me, I think has been more and more related to muskies. Even though I might love fishing for smallmouth more, and I obviously have always been trout has always been a part of my life and a major part of it. And, and I always stress to everyone, we live in this, our trout fishing here is fantastic, obviously largely due to the work of Trout Unlimited. I would say actually not only is our trout fishing great because of Trout Unlimited, but our smallmouth bass and muskie fishing is great because of Trout Unlimited. I mean, it's the same.
There's an interaction.
We would not have the fisheries we have if we did not have cold, clean water coming into these rivers. They would not be. They would be, something else other than what they are. I mean, but the reason we have these great fisheries is because of cold, clean trout streams that feed into all the rivers we fish. So, I mean, that's always been why I think. I just don't see, other than the fact that Trout Unlimited has the word trout in the name, the work that you're doing on all those tributaries is huge for the whole game.
For the resource, for the resource broadly.
The water. Yeah, if we were fishing, if I was a carp guide or something, maybe I would, it would be different. But but I'm not. I fish for fish that need cold, clean water to live.
So you guide 50, 60 trips, give or take, a year. So you might teach all week. Do a couple of guide trips on the weekends, back to teaching.
Last fall I essentially didn't have a day off until for September, October, and wasn't until well into November that I actually had a day off. I shouldn't say that. I think there were a couple days where we just got canceled because it was pouring rain. Although we had some fabulous musky days in the worst weather. That's the thing with muskie fishing, you get to the end of the year and it starts being just, it's brutal, I'd never sugarcoat it. When people always ask me, when's the best time to catch a big muskie? I'm like, probably November, but you're not going to have fun. You're not going to like it, it's going to be uncomfortable and unpleasant. Yeah. But, that's probably your best shot at a huge, I bet, I shouldn't say that. I mean, muskies eat all year, but they ramp up in November.
Better chance. So people can, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording, obviously things are changing with all the pandemic and things, but people can contact you, can get in touch with you. Got your website. Is it EC Anglers?
It's just Eau Claire, www.eauclaireanglers.com.
So
and then my email, which you can get all that off the website, but and a quick Google search of Eau Claire Anglers will get you everything. But my email is eauclaireanglers@gmail.com.
Sure.
.com. So, I mean, you can get a hold of me that way.
And reach out.
And, like I say, we were really, this year, for obvious reasons, people have been a little hesitant to commit to traveling. And, and we're still trying to figure out how to do all this stuff safely. I was telling you before we started, I got a little, this little motorcycle and this little rack,
Yeah,
so I can
great.
run shuttles so we never have to sit in the same, inside of a vehicle together, which I think, I, it's not a perfect world, but if we're just staying outside and staying in the boat, I think we can usually maintain some distances.
Yeah.
I think early on, I'm gonna ask clients to bring their own lunch, and we'll knock off part of the guide, some part of the guide fee just to make that so we're not, it seems so we're not handling food and digging into each other, that kind of stuff. I mean, just things to try to keep things as safe as we possibly can.
Right.
But
Right.
it's gonna. I mean, to me, I'd rather not guide than feel like we were doing things that were unsafe. And so, I mean, that keeping people healthy and safe is
Well,
way more important than
yeah, and with your reputation and your knowledge, has always been thoughtful, cerebral. You take care of the resource, the environment, take care of the client. That
yeah,
wouldn't change, and for the
yeah.
sake of putting somebody at undue risk.
I mean, and so, but I do feel like as we roll along, I think if we're smart about it, we can probably, find ways to get people on the water and, and after fish. But, it's going to require kind of thinking it and require clients. The hard part is a lot of the people I guide come here from, fly in. I mean, we end up with a lot of my clients, come here on an airplane. And so, for obvious reasons, people have been real hesitant to book flights.
Right.
I'm in the whole 1,500 for a saltwater fly fishing trip I was going to take
Oh,
down to Mexico that never happened. So I know what it's like to suddenly go like, well, I have to cancel and stuff. It was heartbreaking.
yeah.
But I understand why this year might be a year where people are a little hesitant. But I think we can, we'll see, and we'll see if the number of cases in Eau Claire County start to ramp up and it feels unsafe again.
Right.
We're not going. I mean,
So
that's the way it's going to be. So
right. So best advice. So people are thinking
yeah,
about it, wondering about it. Just email you, hit you up on
yeah,
social media, whatever the case is.
yeah. You're not going to be on the hook with me. I mean, if we end up for whatever reason, if somebody wanted to cancel a trip, because of really anything. I mean, in the past, my cancellation policy was always give me 48 hours notice, just so I'm not left standing at a boat landing, with nobody showing up.
Right.
But right now, I mean, I've just been, I haven't even really been taking deposits when people have called. I've just been writing names in the book and, hoping that, just understanding completely that, if something, if the situation changes and people don't feel comfortable, or if, then obviously you're not going to be on the hook with me for it. That's for sure.
Right. Right. That's
But
great.
yeah, that's where we're at. And hopefully, I'm hoping, knock on wood, that things go in the right direction and we can get out and fish. Otherwise, I'm just, it's been nice. I've been fishing with my son,
Yeah.
a lot, and, and that's been kind of it, and so,
That's great.
or just fishing alone so
Right.
far. So
Right. That's great. Well, listen, thanks certainly for being on here in as a community, for all that you do for the resource, for the waterways, for the fishing and beyond. You've always been about more than just the fishing, and we certainly have learned a lot from you, and you've been good to our chapter with your expertise. You helped us out with a real recovery tying event, so appreciate all you do, and great to pick your
yeah,
brain as well.
it's nice of you to say. I think actually it goes the other way. I mean, I would say to all the members of Trout Unlimited, to the people who donate, you've enabled me to have these fabulous places to go fishing, and to, that has always, so thank you is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Thank you to the members of the chapter. I really, really appreciate your work.
That's great. That's great. Well, hey, Steve, thanks very much for being on. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Take care.